Hi, welcome back to another episode of Dimensions with D. I'm your host, Danny, and for this episode, since this is the season finale for season two, I guess I kind of wanted to do like a little bit of a reflection, and I guess how the season went so far. Well, I guess not so far, but how the season progressed from last season. I guess to start off, I guess I'll say that there's something strange about finishing the season, especially um, a second season. You don't really realize that you're building up to something until you step back and see the shape of it. I would say when I started season two, I thought I was just having conversations like with NatCon, theater, leadership, writing, college survival, masculinity, momentum, etc., etc. But looking back, I would say the season wasn't about events. It was about identity. And more specifically, it was about who I am when I'm not performing. It all started with NatCon, crowded room, a thousand faces, and somehow still feeling invisible. I went in expecting connection, photos, conversations, maybe even affirmation. Instead, I felt small, and that experience forced me to sit with something uncomfortable. Sometimes courage doesn't look like conquering the room. Sometimes it, sometimes it looks like surviving it. That con didn't fix anything for me. It didn't answer any of my questions. It didn't suddenly make me confident, but it did remind me that I could step forward. I could still step forward even when I'm scared. And I didn't realize it then, but that was the beginning of this season's theme. Because the questions underneath everything was, who am I when I'm not being affirmed? Then came Henry, my first theater role that I talked about this season. The character of Henry wasn't loud, he wasn't flashy, he wasn't dominant. He waited, he listened, and he stayed. And portraying him forced me to confront something, which was that I'm used to equating intensity with impact. But Henry taught me that the presence can be more powerful than performance. Performing, performing or singing, however you want to think about it. The songs, night after night, like "Perfect for You," "Hey Number Three," and like there was no hiding from that. No pretending, just emotional exposure. And that type of vulnerability on stage started bleeding into my real life. Henry reshaped how I see love, not as fireworks, not as urgency, but as consistency. Love as staying, love as listening, love as choosing. And I think subconsciously, I was learning something deeper, which was that strength doesn't have to be loud to be real. But then life started to speed up a little. And that was when I started talking about recognition, leadership, student government, Greek life, awards, titles, invitations, etc., etc. Rooms where people knew my name before I even introduced myself. From the outside, it looked like growth. And in many ways, it was. But something subtle started happening when popularity became currency. You start to you start spending parts of yourself to maintain it. When momentum becomes your identity, you don't notice what you're dropping along the way. There were moments this season where I had to ask myself, am I becoming more invisible or am I becoming more performative? Because I would say, especially for me, it's easy to confuse the two. And that question, that tension, followed me into everything else. next was when I stepped into the role of. Next was when I talked about stepping into the role of Vince Fontaine. Because you see, Vince didn't rush. He didn't tend to over-explain. He didn't chase validation. He was grounded. Playing him, well, I'm sorry, portraying him taught me to trust silence, to let moments breathe, to stop forcing connection, to respond instead of react. And that was when I realized something uncomfortable. Sometimes I overperform socially because I'm afraid of being misunderstood, which I feel like ever since I've started college and had been in college, I feel like that's something I always have to uh, worry about at the back of my head, and so I feel like I always have to. I think that goes hand in hand with overthinking, but yeah, I just thought it was interesting how those two connect into like a social problem for me. But Vince didn't try to convince anyone of his worth. He just existed in it, and that was a new, and that was new for me to go through something like that. And that was kind of I started to learn that confidence doesn't announce itself. Sometimes it just shows up. After that was my interview with fellow student and fellow writer Rin. During the discourse, we talked about our fictional stories, about the protagonists that we write about, develop, and where we get inspiration for those protagonists, and about how the villains are shaped by trauma and choice, and not just the villains too, but protagonists. I would say that's for the most part that's true in like every protagonist I write about in my stories. But during that um, discourse, one question lingered: if I can write multiverses, why am I hesitant to fully step into my own? I think as writers, we process through the characters that we write about. We hide inside metaphors. We give our insecurities to fictional people. And then I realized something. It's easier to write about courage than to practice it. It's easier to design growth arcs than to live through them. And as a result of all that, I would say this season forced me to stop observing myself like a character in one of my stories and start experiencing my life like a person. And following that was me finishing up my declassified college survival guide tips. Because the interesting thing about that is I started because I did two parts already, and I did those last season. And when I got to this season, when I was coming up for ideas, I sort of forgot that I started that when I was coming up for episode ideas for the season. And so when I was looking back, I realized I never finished the tips. And so that's something I wanted to finish this season. And so I finally got to do that. And so I would say, I would say my tips are like more or less the lessons that no syllabus includes, like imposter syndrome, emotional intelligence versus emotional availability, how goodbyes are self defense, and peace over closure. And I said something that stuck with me. Every version of you that dies here, like on college campus or just in college in general, is progress. But that only works if you're willing to let them die. There were versions of me this season that I would say needed to go. Like, for example, I would say it was the overperformer, the approval seeker, the allowed to be seen version, in armor wearing the armor wearing version. I will say though, like I feel like with like most things, we kind of carry over traits and characteristics into like our new version of ourselves, but we don't. Well, we're not that person, but we still like. I think it's like a form of like not forgetting where you came from. I would say, yeah. And that made me realize that growth isn't always glamorous. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's painful. Sometimes it feels like loss. But at the end of the day, it's still growth. After that is when I talked about um, my experience playing. Well, my experience portraying Kurt from what musical was that? Let's see. It was Heather. Kirk Kelly. The character was Kirk Kelly, and it was from Heather's. I couldn't think of it for some reason because Kurt is like kind of like I would say it's a unusual name because I feel like not many people I know his name's Kurt. So that's why I kind of like blanked out right there. But for the character of Kurt on paper, he's ignorant, he's loud, and he's entitled for sure. But once I stopped judging him for on the surface and started understanding him, I saw something very familiar. Insecurity doesn't always whisper. Sometimes it shouts. And I learned that masculinity can be performance, confidence can be compensation, ignorance can become armor. Portraying Kurt forced me to confront something I didn't want to admit, really. There are moments where I've used volume to mask vulnerability, moments where I projected certainty to avoid exposure. And if you really think about it, at its core, that's what makes us and more specifically me human. But maturity is recognizing it, and accountability isn't punishment; it's clarity. So when I take a step back and look at everything that happened, everything I talked about for season two of the show, I guess if I could just sum it up quickly, I would say NatCon taught me courage without applause. Henry taught me presence. Momentum taught me caution. Events taught me stillness. Writing taught me saw. Writing taught me self authorship. And the survival guide tips taught me reinvention. And lastly, Kurt taught me accountability. And the thread connecting all those things is that performance versus presence. This season wasn't about becoming louder, it was becoming more grounded. It was about realizing I don't have to perform strength anymore. I can practice presence. And so, as I wrap up this week's episode, I say, maybe growth doesn't look like applause. Maybe it looks like stillness. Maybe it's not about being the main character, even though we all think we are. Maybe it's about being honest in the scene that you are already in. So I say all that to say this: if you listen to the season, if you felt invisible, if you felt accelerated, if you felt like you were performing for rooms that never really saw you, I hope you know this. You don't have to perform to be worthy. You don't have to be loud to be powerful. You don't have to armor up to be respected. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stay grounded, stay honest, stay present. And with that, this has been season 2 of Dimensions with D. And I'm not finished becoming, but I would say I'm becoming more aware. And I would say at this point, it's not really like a race or a marathon. So I would say that's enough for now. And with that, that concludes the episode. And before I log off, I just want to say thanks to everyone who's listened to all the episodes, not just this season, but I guess for the season, but also last season as well. And to stay tuned for season 3. I decided to keep going with season 3, and so with that, just stay tuned for next season, as I will be taking it into a more. I would say I'm taking the show into a different direction. So, I'm thinking maybe. Well, I shouldn't say because I feel like I'm going to spoil what I'm going to do, but so just stay tuned, and thanks everyone for listening and for the support on the show. And with that, that concludes this week's episode.